Improving on inter-Africa trade and inter-Africa investment was the main focus of discussions taking place on day 2 of the Gauteng Infrastructure Investment Conference. We heard again from Gauteng Premier David Makura, who emphasized the need to improve on economic growth to create more opportunities for Africans. We also heard from keynote speakers participating in panel discussions.
So ladies and gentlemen, as we meet today, united by the African Union's Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, this, we confirm, is a consolidation and synthesis of a vision that has evolved over a period spanning over a century. Africans have been central in shaping this dream, the African dream, and they must be central in its realization. When we see and hear narratives about Africa rising, we have to ask ourselves fundamental questions about whether such narratives are indeed advancing the African dream, the Africa we want. I have been critical of the fact that the Africa rising narrative advanced by the Economist magazine reduces the fundamental question of Africa's regeneration and development to 2 issues only. That is the GDP growth of African countries as well as the growth of the middle class, the African middle class, without dealing with the structural transformation of Africa's economies, at the center of which is institution building, skills development for the African youth, infrastructure development, industrialization, and increased levels of inter-Africa trade and investment.
We chatted to a keynote speaker on what cities and city regions need to do for them to be more attractive to desirable investment. What makes a city attractive for investment?
Okay, there's different reasons. Of course, if you talk about total investment, then there will be certain reasons, but you can also look at different sectors, and each sector will have its own specific quality. So let's say investment in minerals will have a completely different set of needs than investment in healthcare or in biotech. But if we talk about total investment into cities, especially in the case of Africa, one very, very important one is market proximity. And what that actually means in simple terms is how reachable is the investor to the market and to clients. Now, that doesn't only mean inside Joburg, it could also mean to different areas in Gauteng or even further into the rest of South Africa or even into Africa. So the more infrastructurally connected you are with roads and railways, the better and more interesting it is for investors because they have a higher market reach. That's very much for the consumption side of the city. In terms of productivity, African cities don't do too well. So if you look at Europe, it's a very high factor is the skills of people. So there, investors put a lot of emphasis on finding areas with very highly educated, very highly skilled people in technologies and in services. In Africa, it's mentioned as an interest, but it's not really a big priority, which shows very much investors, multinationals investing in African cities are actually not so interested in production. So they don't care so much about using local people to create their products and services. They're much more interested in simply selling their products to us. So one of the biggest problems of African cities is that we're huge consumer markets and we become very vulnerable. Everything gets imported, even our food from all around the world, and we need to produce more, we need to be geared more. So very important for Johannesburg and African cities, we need to educate our students to match the markets. So the big markets changing around the world, we need to actually understand what is the demand, and then we need to create faculties and schools which can actually really provide skilled people that can be absorbed by these firms. Otherwise, we simply get the low end of the deal, and it doesn't really lead to reduction of inequality or the generation of employment.
From an infrastructure investment perspective, do leaders in Africa take into account the need to develop cities to make them position the cities better globally to attract investment and to also to improve on the current levels of intra-regional trade in Africa?
Because urbanization in Africa is quite a recent phenomenon, and still majority of people live in rural areas, the idea of the city becoming very important for future development is something quite new. So it's quite an awakening actually in Africa that urbanization will require the qualities that you would find in international cities around the world. And the perception of that, or even understanding that, is something quite new, and that's something we try to introduce with our research. Of course, a city like Gauteng is really high up the chain of African cities, so there the thinking already exists. I would say that until now, the thinking has always been about how to improve roads and rail in Gauteng itself, which is also good. But what becomes more important is how to connect Gauteng to other African cities, and how do we find the weak points in that network and invest in them. So we could also, as Gauteng, not only invest within our city, we can become big investors in other African city networks. And in doing that, we'll improve trade and investment with Gauteng, which will also have a huge spillover effect on us.
From an African perspective, to ensure higher GDPs per annum, experts all agree the potential lies in trading more within Africa.
I think everybody realizes that the African continent is the next big growth area, and if you don't get it now, chances are you will get left behind. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for South African businesses. So we're identifying a lot of opportunities for our business, creating partnerships on the rest of the continent, because again, sustainability is important. So it's not just about you exporting to the rest of the continent, you're setting up an investment there. There also has to be partnerships with local entrepreneurs and local people in the markets we want to invest in and participate in.
Are we still seeing negative perceptions impact on potential business interests in Africa?
I won't use the word negative. I think people are still a bit susceptible. Of course, there will definitely be a bit of uncertainty. If we take a look at global dynamics and how it has fed into national governments within the continent, we'll probably know that it takes time for people to adapt to changes and to realities, right? And in cases where some cities and provinces have actually grown their GDP more than even some of the states. I'm here because of Lagos State and Gauteng at the invitation of the Premier of Gauteng into the summit, and we'll be forming a partnership. And as you know, Lagos State contributes about 30% of the Nigeria's GDP, right? And just like Gauteng does a substantial amount to South African GDP. So definitely we see a lot of synergies based on trajectories, based on commonalities, and we also feel that we need to be able to do more intra-Africa trade. We understand ourselves better, and we need to get our entrepreneurs to come up into it. And such partnerships will also will challenge our national government to be able to follow suit. And this is not the first time it's been happening. There is an existing bilateral agreement between the government, federal government, national government of Nigeria and also that of South Africa, which has been a bit slow. But when you look at the growth of cities, right, cities will not wait for national governments. Rather, cities will challenge them in a positive by forming synergies to kickstart a process that will foster trade and investment.
Nashina Mohammed for Joburg Today.